Good evening. I'm Jennifer Johnson, presenting module assignment number 1 for Dr. Eric, faculty member, Aspen University, Cultural Perspectives in Psychology. In this presentation, we'll take a look at how culture is defined, how does it impact behavior, how do race and personality impact culture, what cultural groups have had impact, why is it important to recognize cultural impacts? What are the impacts on the individual and their behavior? I'll share references and provide an opportunity for questions. So how is culture defined? Well, it's society's way of life. It's passed down from generation to generation. The norms, the arts, the food, the beliefs, the institutions are all part of culture defined. Language, behavior, religion, spirituality, even attire and rituals. As we speak, New Orleans Mardi Gras is a culture that has begun and has continued for many, many years, and embedded in that New Orleans culture of Mardi Gras is a celebration. It's actually in preparation for Lenten season, which precedes Easter. It is certainly a part of the culture of that part of the country. Culture is also defined as pastimes, even architecture. Our patterns of behavior. It's culture defined within a group or a social community. It's our customs, our social standards, and even our traditions are part of culture. Culture is characteristic of a group of people, their knowledge, their values, even their group identity and their social patterns, as well as their habits and material goods. Unless you're from the culture of Louisiana, you might not understand what doubloons are, or what the purpose of beads that are being thrown, or knickknacks from the floats, material goods that are part of the culture of the New Orleans celebration. So the impacts on behavior, these are shared beliefs and values that a culture tends to inculcate in its population. It's a structure for behaviors and norms. They're principles about behaviors that are expected. It's actually guidelines for thought. It influences psychological thought, and there's an evolution over time. The culture does not necessarily remain the same. The example I give, back in the 60s, in the parochial school, young girls were not allowed to wear slacks. They had to wear the uniform to school. They could have slacks on if it was cold. Once they entered the building, those slacks had to be removed. So cultural impacts over time evolve and change. Women back in the 30s and 40s may not have worn slacks in public. That has certainly changed today, a part of the cultural impacts on behavior. So how has race impacted? Well, race is a classification of people. It's based on physical characteristics, their appearance, their ancestry, their heritage, what they have inherited through their birthright. So race and personality certainly are impacted by culture. So what's personality have to do with it? Well, personality is shaped by the culture, family, friends, education, the environment, and experiences. Personality certainly can evolve over time as well. There's some evidence that early in the formative years, personality is set, but certainly it can be adjusted, adapted, and even pivoted based on the environment, their education, and their experiences. So how does a culture impact personality and race? Well, there are beliefs and values that are connected to the spirituality of the religion, certainly the region of the country, and the living or the lifestyle, all impact, or culture impacts, race and personality. Depending on where you're from, the East Coast is operating very differently than we might see the culture in the South than what goes on the West Coast. So culture certainly impacts personality, impacts race, culture impacts society. So what are the impacts of those groups? Well, cultural impacts have an influence on behavior, on beliefs, the norms and values, even ideas and mental health. There's some cultures that don't believe in acknowledging mental health. As we progress through COVID-19, we're seeing a focus on mental health where it may be more appropriate for seeking mental health, where that was not necessarily the norm 20, 30 years ago. Cultural impacts have to do with public policies. What are the policies that the culture has had on the groups? We have certainly many stories of history as the United States has evolved. When we look at practices and actions, how we live, where we work, how we even socialize and organize are all connected to the cultural impacts on groups. On the individual, genetics and the environment certainly play a role. The experience even impacts their speech, their body language, their humor. We just saw a Super Bowl with the hip hop and rap artists at halftime. That impact is a cultural impact for younger generations to experience music that they may have grown up with. Generation baby boomers and the silent generation may not have experienced the same cultural impacts. So culture does evolve over time, and there are groups within our society that may experience different impacts of the culture, such as the young people with the rap and the hip hop that occurred during this last Super Bowl. Ethical behavior. Based on the culture, the appropriateness of behavior, inclinations to act, guidelines, ideology, what the behavior and practices are all impacted by the culture on ethics and our behavior. Again, one merely turn on national news or even local news to see the impacts of culture, whether we're talking about music, the arts, cuisine, language, behavior, all those cultural impacts eventually involve our ethical practices and behavior. There are references for this presentation. If there are any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.